Hello everyone, I'm Olive, and welcome back to Vintage vs. Modern, a series on my channel that I've been doing to investigate two or more pens from the same lineage but from different time periods to see what has changed over the years. Today, I would like to share with you the Kaweco Sport, a very popular pen that is probably one of the most commonly recommended starter fountain pens. People collect hundreds of these, and I just thought it would be really interesting to investigate the older versions of the Kaweco Sport and see how the newer one compares to it. Like, do they really deserve to be called both the Kaweco Sport? The Kaweco Sport is interesting because the modern version is much more of an homage than a direct remake. However, in terms of look, they have looked pretty similar for the last 100 years, since the initial Kaweco Sport was first released around 1911, 1912, depending on what source you look at. So yeah, the first Kaweco Sports released around that 1910s era were pretty similar. They were, small little pocket pens. They were hard rubber, chased often, with that nice little pattern on there. They had the open gold nib, which is gorgeous. That's a very cool engraving on there. However, they were piston fillers, as was common in the time. Cartridges were not super, done yet, though there are a few examples. They were originally meant as a tiny little pocket pen that a man could put in his sports coat and a woman could put in her purse. Like something like a Schaefer Tuckaway, if you've seen my video on that subject. The Kaweco Sport model went through a couple of design updates and changes throughout the years. Many special editions were made for, different businesses and events. Notably, the Munich Olympics also had a Kaweco Sport version made for them, which is a kind of cool little collector's item that I would love to get my hands on someday. The one that I have is from the 1970s. It is a V16 Sport, which is just the model name. It comes in this little pouch, which I'll, of course, give you a closer look at later. But this was actually towards around the end of the original Kaweco Sports line. Around the 80s, Kaweco kind of dropped the business, being that was kind of the dark ages of the fountain pen. And the Kaweco Sport did not see any new updates until 1995. When the Classic Sport was released. And the Classic Sport is kind of the enduring line that we have today. There are a couple of, spin-offs. You've got the metal ones, you've got the turned acrylic ones. There's even one made by Visconti, which is kind of cool. I would also love to get my hands on one of those. But the one that you will most commonly see is the $20-ish plastic cartridge filling one in a variety of colors. They are, again, wildly popular just because they're cheap, they're cute, and they work decently well. So let's take a look at these three Kaweco Sports and show you what's special about them, what the deal is, and how these tie back to the original. All right, let's take a look at these tiny German pens. Starting, of course, with the vintage one, as usual. This is a truly very small pen. I have, fairly large hands, but this is silly, to be honest with you. It's a silly sized pen. Capped, these are just over 100 millimeters long, just very, very small once again. And they weigh almost nothing. I'm talking just about the pen right now, but we can take a look at the pencil as well. They weigh 10 grams. It's a great pen to just slip in the pocket because you could truly just forget about it. The body is 12-sided on the cap and round on the body, which I think is a nice interplay. It looks quite nice, and it's nice and tapered across the whole silhouette. You've got some trim here. You've got a gold band at the top and a gold band at the bottom, and then a little domed end of the piston turning knob, as well as the Kaweco logo on the top of the pen. The barrel has a couple of adornments on it. It has the nib size and model name, which in this case is the V16, which I've stated before, and oblique broad. However, you will see in the writing sample that this nib is not an oblique broad. I suspect it has been ground down to something closer to like a fine or a medium by a user who did not want an oblique broad. And then, of course, it says Kaweco Sport. This was originally gold, I assume. I filled it in with white so it would be easier to see on video, but normally it would be heat stamped in this gold like the Dreischer logo. The Dreischer I couldn't find a huge amount of information on, but it seems to be some kind of German enterprise that this pen was made for as some kind of corporate gift. Unscrewing the cap will reveal the front end of the pen, which is quite interesting to me. Unlike a modern sport, it is a semi-hooded nib, similar-ish to the Lamy 2000 in a lot of ways. It has a little ink window for the piston filling system, which is blue, not just because it has blue ink in it. It is a blue plastic ink window. And then that goes into a quite small grip and a 14 karat gold nib, which is really nice. In the hand, this pen is small. It is not super usable unposted, but when you post it, and I'm going to post this lightly because I know that these can crack, which is an issue we'll talk about later. It actually becomes a pretty comfortable pen. I like to use this posted. Of course, it makes a lot of sense to use it posted. But yeah, that's kind of the deal with this pen. It is a pen meant to be posted. I'll briefly touch on the pencil. The pencil takes 0.9 millimeter lead, which is kind of cool. And it's a little, you twist at the back, lead comes out the front. It does not go back in, which is kind of annoying. Another thing that's cool is, so the way you refill it is you unscrew the nose cone and you have a little reservoir in here. So you can see the little needle that, pushes lead out normally. But there's a little hole in here. It's incredibly difficult to see. And you shake it out and you get a little piece of lead. And these are the leads that came originally with the pencil, and they are pre-sharpened, which is so cool to me. I don't know why. You never see sharpened 0.9 lead on the market today. So I have been using, 0.9 lead that I bought elsewhere because I don't want to use the cool little pointed ones because that's very special to me. So this whole thing is made out of injection molded plastic. It was the 70s. They were doing that in pens. And, it's not as nice as celluloid or an ebonite, but it gets the job done. And yeah, this is a real pretty amazing feature list for a pen of this size, honestly. Like gold nib, piston fill, nice faceted body, and it's quite nice. Of course, it also comes with this lovely little leather pen case. They still make these for Kaweco Sports, which I think is a nice little value add. But these classic little tiny pen cases are great for the pocket and just to keep your nice little pen safe. Now let's take a look at these two pens. So in some of the B-roll that I'm going to be showing, it's mostly the blue one. It's actually because I bought this one while I was working at the Flax, biannual pen fair because it was so pretty, and I don't have very many pens in this color. Anyway, that's how the modern sport will get you. So we're going to take a look at the frosted grapefruit colored one. I believe it's guava or something like that, but I'm calling it the grapefruit pen because I don't like guavas. It is a slightly bigger pen. It is 106 millimeters capped and then 100 uncapped. And it weighs a little bit more. It's 13 grams, just probably because it's a bigger pen. The clip on here, which you'll notice there's no clip on the original Sport. The clip on here is what you'd call an accommodation clip. It is a slide-on clip that you can remove. I believe they're $3, and it actually stays on there pretty tight. I haven't had any issues lately, anyway, of having a Sport fall out of its clip. I've had that with some other Kaweco pens, like the Special or the Lilliput, but this one stays on pretty well. This body in contrast to the original Sport body, or I guess the V16 body, is 8-sided instead of 12-sided. So that's just a slight difference. I'm not sure exactly why. And Kaweco does something kind of interesting on this pen that I both appreciate and am kind of bothered by. So for those of you not familiar, when you are injection molding something, it's a 2-part or more mold. And when you are removing the part from the mold, you're going to get a line where that mold was, just where a little bit of excess plastic escaped and creates a pretty clear line. Instead of trying to polish these out or hide them in really any way, Kaweco has done an interesting thing and kind of accentuated them. It feels like a design element where the body tapers and hits this kind of, I don't want to call it a sprue line because that makes it seem like it's low quality, but it's very clearly placed there. It's not sloppy. It's very clean. It's not sharp, but it's clear that that's a mold line, which I don't love, but I also understand at this price point. Additional adornments on the body are the Kaweco Sport logo on the cap, as well as the Kaweco logo on the top of the cap. When unscrewing the barrel from the cap, you will be met with a stainless steel nib. It is a number 5 nib, and I believe it is made by either Jovo or Bach, one of those German makers. Kaweco does not make their own nibs. And they write all right. I mean, they're pretty standard. They're off the shelf. And this pen is actually definitely small, but you could theoretically use this unposted, I guess, but my hands are a little bit large to do that. But, in a pinch, if I didn't want to go to the trouble of posting this on the back, which is obviously more comfortable, you could, for a quick note, do that. In contrast as well to the Vintage Sport, this pen barrel screws off to reveal a cartridge system. Technically, there are converters you can use, but they are all terrible and you should not use them. There are also wild folks that I've seen who straight up just like put some silicone grease on the threads here and fill the entire plastic barrel with ink. That's a crazy thing. I'm not going to recommend you do that. That just seems wild to me, but live your truth, man. I'm not going to tell you not to do it. I'm just going to recommend you don't. Like, you really want to carry the fountain pen equivalent to a loaded gun in your pocket, just like pointed at you. Go ahead. Live your truth. If you do that, please leave a comment. I would love to pick your brain, frankly. One additional thing I'll add is I cannot leave well enough alone. I like to mess with things. And I was, a couple of years ago, enlightened to the fact that the number 5 nib on a Kaweco Sport is almost a perfect match to a Schaefer Feather Touch 5 nib that is present on a lot of mid-tier Schaefer pens of yesteryear. It is a lovely 14 karat gold nib, and with a little bit of finagling, you can just pop it right onto a classic Sport. And that really upgrades the writing experience as well as the overall, classiness of it. I mean, it's a fabulous little two-tone gold nib on a freaking Kaweco, whatever you want to call it. So I'll throw in a quick couple scribbles with this nib just because, I feel like it's kind of a fun recommendation to give to people. It's pretty easy to do at home. And you can find Feather Touch nibs loose on places like 5starpens.com and just buy them. They're, like $35, $40. Pop it on here and you have a gold nib Kaweco instead of spending like the $120 that they ask for their gold nib. So, just a little tidbit there on that. Let's get to the writing sample. All right, now let's start with the writing sample for the vintage Kaweco Sport, the V16. So as I said earlier, this was originally an oblique broad nib, but it is no longer. It's kind of closer to a fine medium. It's got an interesting shape to it in that it's got a little bit of line variation, kind of innately, almost like an architect. I can't obviously judge this on how it was originally because I don't know, but it is quite smooth. It writes really nicely, and it's got good flow. It is a 14 karat gold nib. Those often have more flow than a steel one.
The pen itself is a little bit thin in the grip, thinner than I generally like, but the nib is nice enough that I deal with it, basically. As you noticed me playing with the pen there for a little bit, the threads can be a little bit sharp on the fingers. I think that's just where my fingers naturally rest, but that might your mileage might vary on something like this. And of course, we've got a little nib drawing there. Overall, I am a pretty big fan of this pen, even if I have some gripes with it. Now on to the modern Kaweco Sport with a fine stainless steel nib made by, again, either Bach or Jovo. It doesn't make a huge difference to me. They both generally write pretty much the same most of the time. It's a number 5 nib. This is pretty much like the most bog standard stainless steel nib you can get. It's out of the box. It's fine. Kaweco doesn't do any tuning on their end, so it writes fine. I mean, I don't have any real issues with it. It isn't spectacular. The flow is a little bit weak, but that could also just be the J.R. Ben pink ink that I'm using that matches the pen. I deal with it because I love the color match, and it gets the job done, basically. It's not spectacular, but it writes. It's not scratchy, though it is a little bit feedbacky, and it doesn't skip. It's, as you can see, pretty dang dry. And I like the way it looks. I do like that they added their own engraving. The Kaweco logo is a pretty nice looking one. So overall, it's pretty much what you'd expect from a pen of this caliber. It gets the job done. Last but certainly not least, this one doesn't really count just because it's not a Kaweco nib. But, I thought I'd show it anyway. The Feather Touch nib on the Kaweco is something that I personally recommend. It is very easy to do. It is super fun. And yeah, you get some really, really nice writing qualities, super smooth. Of course, your mileage may vary. It's a vintage nib, but it is bouncy. It is nice flowing, and it's beautiful. And if you have the means, I highly recommend picking one up. I mean, look at that little heart breather hole. It's so cute. And I love the script on the nib. They just really, They knocked it out of the park in terms of that nib design, and I like being able to use it on something that's not a fragile celluloid Schaefer pen.
So, what is my take on these vintage and modern Kaweco Sports? I'll start off by saying that the vintage Sport is a pen that I covet to a fault, maybe even. It is a pen that I would collect very many of if I had the means. I just find them so precious and so small, and they write so well, and they're piston fillers, and they come with little pouches. Like, what's not to love? So, there's that aspect. And I did used to carry this little V16 set around with me everywhere as kind of my everyday carry. Both because they wrote really well and they held a decent amount of ink, but also I think to be a little bit of an obnoxious hipster to be like, oh, you have your classic Sport? Well, I've got the original. And so there was that aspect, and I'm not proud of it, but this, I'm being honest. I'm being vulnerable with my audience right now. I will admit that the vintage Sport, although I think it's a better pen, loses out to me as an everyday carry pen because it is less convenient to refill, being that you have to refill it from an ink bottle and you can't just really carry an ink bottle everywhere. Though probably work with like something like a Piniter pen filler or a Visconti pen filler or whatever. But the Kaweco Sport is undeniably a very convenient pen to use as an everyday carry pen. The cartridges are fine. You can refill on the go. That's convenient and all. And then there's the aspect that they're like $25, $30. If you lost one, it wouldn't be a huge deal. Whereas if I lost my V16 set, I would be heartbroken. And I think that is an important aspect to take into account when you're looking at why the pens were made. It was normal to carry around a gold-nibbed piston-filling fountain pen, more or less, back in the day, because that's what there was. And I don't know exactly on pricing, but I'm sure you could get a Kaweco set for a lot cheaper than it is valued at today, which is, anywhere from $100 to $200, depending on who you ask or what kind of set you're looking for. I think as an homage, the classic sport makes a lot of sense because it's filling a similar role but adjusted for the modern day. I think tastes have changed in such a way that, you know, they made this in like 3 colors. You can get 900 of these. So, you know, whether or not you like it, like people can buy more of this pen. And I think that kind of defeats the value proposition of a fountain pen for me, even though I own 2 of them. I don't know. I think this makes more sense for a modern audience, though I think Kaweco would make money hand over fist if they released something more similar to a V16 or even like an earlier 112A Kaweco Sport. And they have. They did that collaboration with Visconti, but those are very scarce and very hard to come by. And people seem hesitant when it comes to spending a lot of money on a Kaweco Sport because now it's this. It's not this anymore. Kaweco Sports are nice, but they're mostly cheap. They're Lamy Safari grade pens. They're starter pens. So when something like the $1,100 Sterling Silver Sport came out, people were like, psst, psst, gross. If that pen had a gold nib and a piston filler, people would be like, yeah, baby, sign me up. And that's fair. But, you know, it's all about who you're selling the pen to. And I think Kaweco has made a pretty smart decision in marketing to a new generation of fountain pen people who don't want an all black pen with a piston filler and a gold nib necessarily, because that's expensive. Like, that's a Lamy 2000, what I just described. So, yeah, I personally like my V16 Sport, but I understand why this exists. Clearly, I own 2 of them. They're cute, they are functional, and you have the added benefit of being able to, like, mod them a little bit. You know, my little Feather Touch 5 nib on this is now a pretty spectacular writer in a pretty, you know, hardy body. So I can have something of a vintage writing experience while not being completely heartbroken if I lose the whole pen. So that pretty much does it for me on these 2 models, 3 pens, and a pencil, I guess. I hope you enjoyed. I had a lot of fun making this one. These are pens that I personally care about a lot, so my heart's really in it this time. And yeah, I hope you had a good time watching. If you liked this and you are hoping to see more fun content, subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. I always love seeing your comments on here, what your takes on these 2 pens are. Would you prefer a vintage sport or a modern sport? Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you next time. God damn it, I dropped it. I dropped it.